Just a minute. It's yeah. So we are online. We are online. So I enable the sharing option. So maybe we can start.
Okay. I am Venkatesan Rajagopal, a member of the Executive Committee of the Breakthrough Science Society. On behalf of Breakthrough Science Society, I
hold the
welcome all
microphone
of
closer to your mouth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I welcome all the audience to this function today, which is a function to commemorate the birthday of the great scientist in India, Meghnad Saha. We have a lecture program on this, and on the same occasion, we are also planning to release a book, A Brief History of Science, which is published from Breakthrough Science Society in this occasion. So for these two events combined together, we welcome all the audience and participants who are online in Zoom as well as offline in watching through YouTube and YouTube channel. And first of all, I also like to welcome the guests today. We have a honor and privilege to have with us Professor Bikas Sinha, uh, who will be delivering a special lecture on Meghnad Saha, his lives and works. We also feel privileged to welcome Professor S.G. Dani from Institute of Mathematics, who will be releasing this book, Brief History of Sciences. We do see a few senior professors in our Zoom, and I welcome them. And of course, our president, Professor Dhruva Mukherjee from Breakthrough Science Society, is also with us here. So I welcome all of you once again. Friends, as the first event of this program, I would like to welcome uh, and request Professor Dhruva Mukherjee to say a few words about the genesis of this book, The Brief History of Science, to all of us. Professor Dhruva Mukherjee.
Can we start?
Yes, we can see you.
Professor Bikas Sinha, Professor S.G. Dani, distinguished scientists who have come here, my fellow scientists and students and research scholars. I welcome you on behalf of the Breakthrough Science Society on this occasion of releasing the book and arranging a lecture on the illustrious scientist, Professor Meghnad Saha, by Professor Bikas Sinha. Let me say a few words about the book which is to be released today. The book, Brief History of Science, the first edition of the book, was published in 2017. It was based on a series of articles written by Professor Soumitra Banerjee in our central organ, the Breakthrough magazine, over a number of issues. Afterwards, after extensive discussions among the Breakthrough members, the book was brought out as in a printed form, and it was a part of the activity of Breakthrough to bring scientific awareness and scientific temper in the society, which is the motto of Breakthrough.
YouTube.
This was the book earned wide appreciation from the scientists, practicing scientists, from the science activists.
Professor Durvaja, you got muted. Please unmute and speak.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now, yes.
So the book, after it was published, earned wide uh, acclaim from the public, from the practicing scientists, from science activists, from the general people, and also the academicians from humanities also expressed their admiration for the book. The book was exhausted soon, and there was a demand for the book from the many well-wishers, and we also felt that it is necessary to bring out a new edition of the book. While bringing the new edition, this has been revised, two new chapters, two very important new chapters, one on science in China and the other on Arab science, which were not included in the first edition. In addition, inside also, some parts of the book were revised on the basis of comments received from the readers. I hope this new edition will also get the same acclaim, same appreciation as the first edition did. We are bringing out only an online version today. Because of the pandemic situation, we are not able to bring out a printed volume of the book, but we hope that when the situation becomes somewhat normal, we'll be able to bring out the printed version. So I welcome you once more. I welcome you to this occasion on this program, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor, for a brief introduction about this book. And as you said, the first edition not only got exhausted, from our breakthrough, we got reports that it has served as an instrument of a kind of a science movement in our country. Many students, many institutions have gone through these books, and discussions were held. And a series of talks are also arranged in this book, as this book connects science and society in a very beautiful way. And that is the requirement to meet which this second edition is being released today. Thank you very much, Professor. And now I welcome Professor S.G. Dani. Before welcoming him, it's my duty to briefly introduce him. Of course, many of us we know, but there are a large number of audience. So he is a professor of mathematics in Indians of Technology, Bombay, and he's also the chairman. He was a member, and successively he became a chairman of the National Board of Higher Mathematics in India. More than all these things, he has taken interest in studying what is the so-called Vedic mathematics, and found that there is nothing like that. And he started a movement to debunk the so-called Vedic mathematics, which people have been making use of this Veda just to brand and sell whatever they want. So that is something which is very interesting. A lot of YouTube lectures are available on that by Professor Dani. So we are very much privileged to have him with us, and it is most apt a scientist who is to release this edition, second edition of our book. I request Professor Dani to say a few words and release this book, Brief History of Sciences. Professor Dani. You please unmute your mic, sir.
Yeah. Thank you for the kind introduction. Now, Professor Mukherjee, Professor Banerjee, and Professor Bikas Sinha, and all the participants. may at the outset say that we are commemorating Professor Meghnad's online version of the book explained to you. I mean, I just in any case, it has been recalled. Also, the pleasure to add, he mentioned that many scientists and appreciated the book, and I must say, pronounce that I am really one of them. It is really a pleasure to read the book.
Yes. Thank you.
Now, before I release the book, maybe I should say a few words in this context. So, in the popular mind, I mean, when there is the subject of history is sort of related to the cliche. So, those who forget history are condemned to repeat it. That's well-known kind of quotation that I suppose the present company would recognize that this is a very limited view and rather negative one, in fact. But history as a whole also has a lot more to it than just something that you should not forget. I mean, it's about understanding our development. I mean, from the very beginnings, we all know that the world that we have here around here is not something eternal. It has a starting point. In fact, a very small period that it's a rather small period that the civilization has existed if you compare the wider cosmological scale. And over that, there has been a certain development, and which is what history constitutes. And it's not simply the sequence of events. At one time, the broader history used to be taught in terms of which king followed whom and which war battles took place, etc. But in that context, when there was a realization that there is more to society than simply the rulers and the ruled. So, I mean, like you all know about the role of means of production, the sociological changes, the revolutions, and so on. And besides that, besides these broader features, there is a certain pattern or there is a certain dynamics to history, and that it's something that is what is very enlightening as a, on the one hand, and also it provides a way of thinking about our world. Now, here today, we are sort of focusing more on the history of science. Again, history of science, in a naive way, could be thought of as when was this thing discovered, or when that law was discovered, Boyle's law, Newton's law, or relativity, or quantum mechanics, and so on. You can just put these sequentially and put it, but that doesn't really constitute the entire body of knowledge that we have acquired. Apart from the fact that scientists have discovered various things, created various things, the whole process, and this is not recognized widely enough, that the process has given us a way of understanding how we proceed. And that's, I'm referring to what we call the scientific method. That new truths we discover by by following a certain process, which has both the steps to be taken and also the discipline to be followed. I mean, it's not, see, at one time, for lack of knowledge, lack of inputs, etc., various ad hoc assumptions had to be made. People had to depend only on just intuition, etc. But as science progressed, we know that we don't need to depend on assumptions involving the supernatural in one form or other. There are ways in which, I mean, there's probably not a time to go into a description of the whole scientific method, but the whole point is you make a hypothesis, you verify, if there are discrepancies, you correct them, either modify the model or revise it thoroughly, etc. And ultimately it's an interaction between the ideas from the brain and the verification in the material world. I mean, and you don't believe in something just because it has been a traditional belief, or because that would make you proud to believe that, etc. These are kind of extreme, in fact, extreme idealistic positions which we know are totally absurd from a modern day scientific point of view. Now, once we agree that there's more to the process of science, or a history of science, along with history comes all these aspects are the philosophical aspects, along with the way of determining truth. We also need wherewithal about when do you consider truth. I mean, the epistemological aspects and so on. Again, I'll not spend time on going into that. So there's a certain philosophical aspect that also comes into being. So just the way histories have been written for explaining the dynamics, going back, for instance, to various people like Marx and so on. There's also a need. There's also a need to have a picture of the scientific development, and this is something that is provided succinctly in this book. So the book, for those of you who have seen the first edition, you would know that it goes over, it starts all the way from the early beginning of civilizations, how what was how the various discoveries got fostered, what prompted new discoveries, and so on. And in the process of this, for instance, how agriculture evolved, how slavery evolved, and so on. So and interrelating it to science. I mean, it's not just the social organization, but the scientific aspect and the situation, various aspects of the ground realities at various times together give you a more complete picture of how we have now arrived at the way where we are. For instance, the changes in philosophical positions, etc. So at one time, I mean, as an antithesis to the superstitions, etc., there were extreme positions that you believe in something only if it's a part of sense perception, etc. But I mean, I'm referring to something like positivism and so on. That kind of extreme position was found to be untenable. I mean, for instance, we now do believe in things, though we do not see the electrons or neutrinos or something. We know that it makes sense to talk of electrons or neutrinos as a part of reality. So that involved not just the issue of establishing some consequences or facts experimentally, but how to relate a background reality, a materialistic reality behind the world in terms of what we actually verify. So there is a certain advance needed, and many of these things had to be explained suitably, and the book does a very good job of doing. Taking, I mean, I'm sort of skipping various things. It's not my. I'm not trying to describe the contents of the book. So the brief history of science, in other words, is gives kind of, in a nutshell, it gives you the picture of how the underlying ideas developed and how the way we understand the phenomena, not just in terms of what we verify, but what to conclude from what we verify in terms of in terms of the logical framework and philosophical framework, etc. So I found the book very interesting personally, and I should really congratulate Professor Soumitra Banerjee and the people who are responsible for bringing this out. I'm very happy that the initial print has exhausted, and there's been a very good demand, and now we are there's a plan to bring out even a new print edition, but in the context of the pandemic and so on, we are now content with, for the present, we are now content with an online edition. Uh, I'm sure I would like to encourage all everyone present, or even who may be contacted in one way or other, to read the book and enjoy it. And when the print edition comes, I'm sure many people would like to acquire it also. It's something of a collector's copy work for, for for whoever is interested in science, and I would say it should be something that it should interest everybody. So with these few words, I will release the book. So I'll share this screen, and share the screen. And now let me. I suppose you are able to see the screen, I suppose, right?
Yeah, the breakthrough web page.
So yeah, now let me formally release this release the book. Here it is. So let us thank you for this opportunity to say a few words on this perspective and releasing this book. I'm very happy to do that.
Thank you, Professor Dani. It's a wonderful job uh, uh, to help breakthrough to release this book to the audience and to the public. And to the public, it is available from now on through this Amazon. People can order it and have this book with them. In addition, some of these chapters, the important chapters of these books, this book is also available on our webpage. Whatever you just saw, the breakthroughindia.org. In that website, you can also have a look of the articles published in this book in the earlier version. The current version is available in the electronic form for sales in Amazon. So I request you to order it and have it and enjoy this. As I initially told and also explained by Professor Dani, this book connects the science and philosophy. And as the science grew, the philosophy also had to shed most of its idealistic outlooks and become materialistic, and also become more and more scientific materialistic. And the most advanced concepts which are disturbing this philosophical outlook of materialism, like the discovery of neutrino and the so-called positivism, all those contemporary ideas and how they are overcome by a scientific materialistic ideology has also been described in this book. So I request the audience and the students who are watching this program, then they can order this book and enjoy this book. Thank you, Professor Dani, and thanks for releasing this book. You can now come out of this share mode, I request.
Can you?
Yes. Yeah, on the top of your screen, that drop down menu will be there.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Professor Dani, for releasing this book. And so the next event is the main event of today's program, to celebrate the 127th birthday of a great scientist, Meghnad Saha, the star man, you can say, that the man who, of course, did not touch the stars, but measure the star temperatures, and gave a wonderful theoretical background for this evolution of stars and the physics of the stars. Well, this Meghnad Saha is not only a scientist, and many times our students even wonder that there was a MP who was a scientist. A scientist being an MP is a great thing. Even many people do not know today. So that is Saha, a man, not only a scientist, a humanist who served our society, built a lot of infrastructural projects in our country. So we have with us Professor Bikas Sinha. It's really a wonderful opportunity for us to have him with us. Such a person who led the Saha Institute of Nuclear Physics in our country. And before requesting him to deliver the main speech on the life and works of Meghnad Saha, it is my duty to introduce him to the audience. Professor Sinha, he did his postgraduates and higher studies in London and served there for about 12 years in teaching and researching in Rutherford High Energy Laboratory in King's College in London. And that was the time where the physics was in a very bubbling stage. You can say kind of golden period in the development of physics. And so his work on quark gluon plasma is well recognized by the world. And because of that and his deep involvement in the physics, he was given a lot of responsibilities. He led the team of scientists from our country to some of the most important laboratories in the world. And he took a team to CERN in Europe, Geneva, and also to Brookhaven National Laboratory in USA to expose them to the most development, most modern developments in physics and come back and work in our country. And that was, you can say, a solid foundation laid in our country to develop the nuclear physics. He joined in Babar Atomic Research Center in 1976, and subsequently he became the director of Variable Energy Cyclotron Center in Kolkata, and in 1987. And there he set up the most important, the benefit of radiation, what we call the Radiation Medicine Center in that cyclotron facility. Dr. Sinha, of course, he is, okay, we can very well understand, for the audience also will be able to realize that he has been awarded many very important awards and series of uh, fellowships also he got, and most importantly he was the fellow, he became a fellow of Third World Academy of Sciences in Italy 2002 and Indian Academy of Sciences in Bangalore 2004, and Honorable Prime Minister of India nominated Professor Sinha as a member of the Scientific Advisory Committee, and he continued the second time also as a member of the Scientific Advisory Committee to the Prime Minister of India from 2009 to 2013, the second term. And he has been awarded by the Government of India the Padma Shri and Padma Bhushan subsequently. It's the highest awards of Government of India to the scientists. And currently, he's a professor in Indian National Science Academy, and he is also holding a distinguished honorary scientist position in Indian National Science Academy (INSA) from 2015 to 2000, just a year ago, till a year ago. Most importantly, which is something unique of Professor Sinha, most of the scientists they write books in English, but I saw, unfortunately, I am not a Bengali, but I saw two books published by him recently, probably meant for students, the Sristik o Christi and Stan Kal o Biswalak. So the Sristi o Christi is also available in Amazon. I saw that. And these are the books which got very good appreciation from the Bengal lingual community. So something that he does even now, a kind of enthusiastic service to the Bengali students. So I welcome Professor Bikas Sinha. It's really a pleasure for us to have you and listen to your talk. Professor Bikas Sinha, please.
Thank you, Professor Anagopal. That was very kind words. For the task people have given me, particularly ISAR Kolkata, is a huge one. Life and works of Meghnad Saha, if you discuss it, it will go through the night up to morning. is a most incredible life that we do know of a person who was born in a very impoverished life but rose to a fantastic height in science. So I've chosen um, a rather more limited version of life and works, which is obvious in the title. A spectacular journey from astronomy to astrophysics, a quantum leap, giant step. And this I would elaborate in the next 40 minutes or so. Now, Meghnad Saha was born today, 127 years ago, in a remote village, rather undistinguished and nondescript, near Dhaka in the undivided Bengal, 127 years ago. Now, of course, in Bangladesh, in a family where his father was an indignant shopkeeper, a grocer. Country was at that moment was under colonial rule of the British. The society was sharply divided by rigid caste structure, destructively poor, extremely superstitious, and backward. Young Meghnad had to fight almost all his life against all these conceivable odds to free himself from the crippling poverty, from the caste-ridden isolation and oppressive neglect. Yet he rose to the highest level of scientific endeavor by sheer hard work and gift of his obvious genius. To start off with, I record something which Rasendra Chintamani from the 9th century wrote down, which Meghnad Saha believed very much. I record fearlessly, which I have carried out by my own hand. And that was his motto all his life. Bengal, however, was basking at that time in the glorious social movement of the famous Bengal Renaissance, attaining supreme success in all kinds of intellectual pursuits, in literature, art, science, history, for that matter, in any endeavors that a society can aspire to. Not surprisingly, Meghnad Saha was deeply impressed and inspired by the vibrant spirit, the contemporary ambiance of Bengal. He eventually joined Presidency College and became member of that magic enlightened group of classmates. Satyendranath Bose of Bose-Einstein matrices, bosons fame, Prashant Chandra Mahalabis, who put India in the map of statistics, Acharya Jagadish Chandra Bose, the teacher who discovered millimeter waves, and Acharya P.C. Roy, who brought the spirit of entrepreneurship in a big way, first time in India by an Indian. So the very year they breathed in the magnificent institution, there was an element of enormous expectation, with a dream that will show to the world they're as good as any of the best of the world indeed. Despite colonization, despite untold misery, despite absence of any worthwhile facilities, they did that. At the age of 24, Meghnad was appointed a lecturer in the Calcutta University by no less a person, but an extraordinary, wonderful leader, old person, Sir Ashutosh Mukherjee, the Vice Chancellor of Calcutta University. In Europe, those traditional things are going on. The foundation of Galileo and Newton has been shaken at the very base. Albert Einstein's special theory of relativity, leading to a radically different understanding of space and time. Space and time became an intrinsic part of our understanding of the nature around us, unlike the Newtonian concept of them being there with no real role. The useful Meghnad, with great zeal of enthusiasm, embraced the turmoil at the very heart of contemporary physics. But there is nobody to talk to. In fact, young Bose and young Meghnad, they learned German, particularly Meghnad Saha, translated with the permission of Albert Einstein the papers of general relativity and published where? In the newspaper, The Statesman, very, very unlike present situation. So they went on doing all kinds of wonderful experiments. I've slowly come to the main theme. Saha used thermodynamic equilibrium in the context of chemical reaction. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry. This is Saha at the age of 25, just before he's going to Europe. But his mind was full of all these wonderful ideas which he couldn't express because there was no one to express to. I'm afraid that disease is still existing in our country. He realized the context of chemical reaction, concept of thermodynamic equilibrium is very relevant. And he had a habit, of course, of reading desultory things, anything that comes to his hand. And as you will see shortly, that helped him in terms of formulating his famous equation. In general terms, before arriving at the famous Saha ionization equation, he actually tried to understand and he understood the quantum model of Bohr, which was very preliminary at that time in the world, and the consequent spectroscopy of atoms, thermodynamics, and more important, chemical ray process. Apply the techniques of equilibrium and non-equilibrium statistical mechanics. In short, a comprehensive equation, an elegant outcome of truly interdisciplinary research. The young Meghnad did not know this word interdisciplinary, which is very fashionable now. But something told him in his heart, he has to learn this thing, so he learned. I do feel today, rather than going on lecturing about interdisciplinary, just induce a certain motivation to youngsters why understanding other disciplines are important for his own research and thinking. So that happened long before the Saha equation was discovered. I now go to the next slide. This is a interesting, you have seen probably most of you, all the bright students of Jagadish Chandra Bose. I have written there for your fun tonight, a fancy dress party. It will be a fancy dress party in today's world. Imagine a bunch of these people coming out of my Presidency University today, one fine afternoon, all in dhoti, Punjabi or kurta, all of them. including the great teacher Jesse Bose, coming out to Cornwallis Street, they will think it's a fancy dress party because they are all clad in that gear. Now the point is that those days most people, being essentially very naturalistic, they didn't want to wear anything but this particular gear. There was a tremendous passion to wear dhoti Punjabi all the time. This is something to learn. Meghnad Saha is on the left of Jagadish Chandra Bose, Gyan Chandra Bose on the right. On the top standing Sinha Datta, who was a colleague of Meghnad Saha. Next one is Satyendranath Bose, Bose Einstein Statistics, then G.M. Bose, and so on and so forth. It's a remarkable picture, actually, some sort of. It's a picture, old picture, but it's from archive, which is in Krishnanagar. It's a little town outside Calcutta, quite outside Calcutta. And she's Acharya P.C. Roy, the chemist. And standing on the left-hand side is Meghnad Saha. Interesting how they look, how they go on changing with time. Down below, the great Arnold Summerfield of Germany, coming to visit Meghnad Saha in 1929 in Allahabad University. Those days, professors were looked upon with a great deal of respect. And you can see that from their clothes, the way they sit down, etc., etc. Not like today. But film stars, cricketers looked up more than a professor in university, very unfortunately. So this is another historic picture. 1929 in Allahabad and 1916 in Krishnanagar. So, Saha's intellectual preparation. You see, the normal procedure in Europe, and certainly in India now, is to have a so-called supervisor who gives you a topic to study and then do research and get a PhD. But those days there was nobody to teach either Bose or Saha because they're way above anybody who's around them. Ashutosh Mukherjee did recognize that and therefore asked them to give advanced lectures in Calcutta University. Ashutosh Mukherjee being really a bright person, one of them was given thermodynamics and Bose was asked to give the talk on lectures of special theory of relativity. Anyway, to come back to Saha's intellectual preparation for the famous Saha equation. You see, Saha studied everything that comes to his hand. He started writing all kinds of papers and publishing on Maxwell's stresses, on the limit of interference, on the pressure of light, on the dynamics of electron, and so on. Saha, in fact, has given an account of his intellectual preparation in a letter to Professor H.H. Pasquet many years later. I began from 1916 to read rather desultorily any book on physics, mathematics, and astronomy and astrophysics, which came in my way, found in the library of my old presidency college. Alas, that library now is not exactly what it was before. I might add that I had begun to learn German privately as early as 1911 when I was a student in a science class. That's how genius is made, you know. Genius is not made just by sitting there and apple dropping on his head. Sheer industry. Nobody's behest, no mama, no papa, but he had to learn German because all the major papers at that time was published in Zeitschrift Physik, which is a German journal. And then he came along, his breakthrough contact virtually with Miss Agnes Clark's 2 books on astrophysics and sun. And these excited, quote, my interest in astrophysics and made me familiar with some of the problems. And he went on and on and on. So, I will show you some pictures. This is the Meghnad Saha. And there is a bit of a fun thing here. You see, C.V. Raman, with all his genius, was a very arrogant man, no question. And he gave Saha a lot of trouble. Whenever Saha asked for some money grant, people used to ask C.V. Raman because he was a Nobel laureate winner already. And C.V. Raman inevitably said that Saha is no good at experiment, which probably had an element of truth. This is a group photograph in physics faculty at Calcutta University, taken on the eve of Saha's departure to Europe. You can see S.N. Bose, C.V. Raman. Now, C.V. Raman is not sitting in the middle, which is very peculiar, because he usually insisted on sitting in the middle. But because Meghnad was going away, that privilege of sitting in the middle, looking rather elderly compared to his age, with his stick and so on. Whereas S.N. Bose on the extreme left is completely bemused in his own thoughts. It's an interesting picture, I thought. Now come to the main theme of Saha equation. Here we see, first of all, the famous John Egger and the part of the paper where the ionization equation was written down. But the incredible thing, although the race was all over Europe to find out the structure of the sun, how the spectrum looked like, each one of them missed something or the other, including John Egger. He was Nernst's colleague. He did not realize the importance of ionization potential, as I'll come to. But Meghnad Saha, to his eternal credit, gave enormous credit to John Egger. And this is the equation which looks, believe my word, very, very strangely what Saha equation is all about. In fact, irony is, Meghnad Saha did not write his Saha ionization equation first. It was John Egger, and there was another British person, Frederick Alexander Lilleman, who wrote down without knowing what it means to have ionization potential. That's the catch. If there are young people in the audience, I have to tell them that they have to understand when to bite the cake and how. Otherwise, they will miss out the fundamental point. Meghnad Saha, being not a specialist, helped him because he looked at it from fresh air, and that caused him later some problem, as you shall see. This is the Frederick Alexander Lilleman, who was Churchill's advisor, Winston Churchill. And actually, Lord Cherwell he became, and he was scientific advisor to Winston Churchill during the war, Second World War. And legend goes, he was primarily responsible for the incredibly sad, destructive famine of Bengal. He complained, Frederick Alexander Lilleman, all the time that he didn't get enough credit for what he has done. Well, too bad. Plaskett actually sorted out that it was Saha who pointed out the relevance of the Saha equation, ionization equation, to solar spectrum. And that's the joy of the whole business. This is a popular history of astronomy. Agnes Clark, she is a Scottish lady. In fact, she couldn't get a job because she was a woman. It's unbelievable today. But 19th century, early 20th century, that was the reality. And Meghnad, believe it or not, learned his astronomy, which he transformed to astrophysics, first time in the history of mankind, through these two books of Angus Clark. That was the Bible of Meghnad Saha. Not from a man, not from a teacher, not from a supervisor, nothing. He just loved every word of this lady. And she was a popular writer, so to speak, but it was not hardly popular in today's concept. It was a very well written and Meghnad understood. So, Meghnad Saha wrote the four most revolutionary papers: ionization in the solar chromosphere, elements in the sun, on the problems of temporal radiation of gases, on the physical theory of stellar spectrum. Now, I want to draw attention to the younger generation. You all want to go abroad and be great, right? You want to get a PhD, get a job, get a car, get a whole sort of thing. All this work was done by Meghnad Saha in Calcutta University. The last one was revised when he was a founder at Imperial College, and people thought that you cannot do such work in sitting in India. People still think so, by the way. I have a feeling people still think, if you scratch them, that nothing happens in this country, go abroad and do well. The parents still think there's no hope in this country, go abroad. Everyone wants their sons and daughters to go abroad. Ridiculous. What has they been brought up? But Meghnad Saha was very patriotic. He wrote these things out and sent to philosophical magazines of Law Society, and they're all accepted. The last one was actually revised at the behest of Fowler and sent to Law Society. And Fowler recommended those days, that was the tradition. And these are very fruitful concepts. Poor chap, when actually Meghnad was suggested the idea of being a fellow of the Royal Society, it's a Fowler who actually did that, along with who? Along with Linneman, because Linneman was forced to do that, not other people and so on. So now, Meghnad Saha at Copenhagen, forget about the rest of the thing, they got confused. This is a history which I like to spend half a minute. I was in Copenhagen when I was at King's. I used to go there very often. It's very simple, Copenhagen, this boring city. There is no film, there is no sofa, there is no great dining room. Dining room was just coffee, beer, and some small broth, they say, open sandwiches. No frills, nothing. But you see, this is the lecture theatre, which was known as circus. Why circus? Because the speaker is like a rabbit or like a prisoner. And all the famous scientists, like a circus, they were going to really attack him. That's the idea. Those who can see this slide, can you see this slide? Hello? They're going to sleep probably.
Yes, we can see.
Yes, we can see.
Thank you. You see now, extreme left is Pauli. Then the third from the left is Heisenberg, Max Born, and so on and so forth. Right now, there. And Meghnad Saha is number 9. Niels Bohr, unlike my country, where the director and the bosses have to be given a space, didn't get a space, so he has to hang around on the wall. Interesting. If you look at it in the back, number 12 is Homi Jehangir Baba. I suspect, as a joke, it's the first time Homi Baba sat behind Meghnad Saha, as it were. But it is the most exciting place. It used to be closed down on this Institute, where Bohr, Ben Barthelson got the Nobel Prize. I had the privilege of spending 6 months at a stretch for 3 years. It's the simplest possible abode with wonderful things happening all the time. And discussions were the main thing. There was no pomposity, there was no frills, there was no great thing of poshness and so on. It was a revealing experience. Ionization in the chromosphere, on the physical theory of stellar spectra, on the problems of temperature radiation of gases, elements of the sun. These are the papers. I don't know, something wrong with this. But the point is, Meghnad Saha saw at once, by dealing with this equation, Meghnad and so on, the importance of ionization potential using thermodynamic equilibrium in the chemical equation, reaction, sorry. And this is the famous equation. Now, when I first saw it when I was a young kid in England, I knew it was right. I tell you why. Because if somebody finds an equation with numbers like 4.571 and 2.5, and is now not visible after log t minus 6.5, it must be right. Otherwise, how can he catch up with these numbers? And this is the famous equation. And Alfred Fowler helped Meghnad quite a bit. And he also was the PhD supervisor of 2 more persons from India, Subramaniam Chandrasekhar and Homi Jiangi Baba. Another person, Adesi minus 6.5, is Henry Norris Russell, American scientist, a great figure, great energy. He actually proved Saha equation in and out measurement in the sun. Another one is the Ralph Howard Fowler and famous Milne. And they were there to collaborate with him and so on. And coming to the one part, this is the famous chromosphere during the total solar eclipse. And ironically, the chromosphere has a temperature which is larger than the middle of the surface of the sun. And there was a riddle. And that riddle couldn't have been solved. The riddle lies in the fact that ionization is very high in the chromosphere. By that time, Saha has come back to India. And it has happened to so many of my friends, young and old. And he lost touch with the mainstream. Because he didn't have a laboratory worthwhile. He didn't have a group who were interacting all the time. There was no actual research temperament in India. They come to the office, do their work, go home. But the intensity of the Imperial College in Copenhagen was absent. And this he felt very strongly. And he started missing the whole business. And suddenly he realized the father of Saha ionization equation, well known all over the world, suddenly has eclipsed all the big things that is happening in the big organized labs in America and Europe is passing through his hand, and he has no say in it. So the point is, as a desultory reader and a genius, you can contribute up to a certain point. Beyond that, you cannot, because you don't have the don't have the ambience of a proper laboratory and proper kind of people to talk to. I'm afraid at not such a young age anymore myself, I feel the same problem plagues my country. There is the attitude of research is slowly diminishing. Research is a whole-time job. You think of research, you sleep with research, you dream with research. But who the hell is going to do that is the question. So, Meghnad Saha started with isolation, and Meghnad Saha ended with an isolation. So what did you do? What did you do? to survive. This is the Meghnad's late age. You see the transformation of his face. Inside, completely frustrated. You don't have any money to set up his lab or set up his group. In fact, I was surprised when I became the director of Saha Institute in 1992. I went on for 17 damn years that there was no center of astroparticle physics in Saha Institute. Meghnad Saha was so obsessed with his denial of his future that he didn't start anything to do with his discovery at Saha Institute, which was his PhD. Took me 10 years to convince people that it's a very important business. Because Meghnad Saha, to my colleagues, is the ultimate guru. If you say during the day is night, they will believe it's night. It's extraordinary. It was an extraordinary experience of mine that nobody would actually believe that today's world central astroparticle is important. Anyway, I was just about so frustrated, disappointed, angry, gaunt, and not so young man. Completely changed his field. That's my view. You don't have to agree with that. To politics. River Regiment, and the Damodar Valley Corporation, 5-year plan, etc., etc. In fact, there is actually extraordinary verbal conflict between Pandit Nehru, and Dr. Meghnad Saha, which goes as follows. Once exasperated by speech made by Saha, Prime Minister Nehru, who normally behaved gently, burst out saying that Dr. Saha should not have been involved in worthless affairs of Parliament instead of himself engaged in scientific activity. Meghnad Saha was not in the Lok Sabha that day. When he retorted later, quote, scientific pursuits like Meghnad Saha talking about himself, would be remembered long after the politicians reigning today are totally forgotten. Such was the confidence of an angry young man who was not so young by then. So he shifted his interest completely. Application of Saha equation, in our case, we use it for early universe cosmology of quark nuggets. And Professor Kalam used it for rocket trajectory, the same equation in a different way. So big ideas, wonderful ideas, don't die with time. They are merely used in different contexts, for a different context, for a different purpose, but still is valid. Today is a big day for me, because talking about astrophysics, my good friend Roger Penrose, I just heard, has got the Nobel Prize of this year. And I'm talking about Meghnad Saha, one of my gurus, and it's such a pleasure to be with you. The last thing to celebrate Meghnad Saha is a fantastic Latin verse. To the stars work and fun, ad astra per aspera irrana idam. Thank you and good night. Any question?
Yeah, thank you, Professor. The audience have a chance to raise their questions, and Professor is available here to answer. And those who are watching YouTube also can raise their question in the chat. We have a volunteer to pick it up and place it in the forum. So, there is a request has come from one of the participants. Professor Sinha, for you there is a a small kind of a request, or I don't say, I don't know whether it is a question or a request, that the development of astronomy at one point, the development of astronomy at one point made the science of astrophysics and then cosmology. What in general terms is Saha's contribution in this progression? That is for um, for the common science lover, I mean, for a general public, how can we put it in a general terms? That is, what is his contribution from astronomy to astrophysics in this progression? So somebody wants this in a nutshell for a general public.
Well, I have mentioned all this time. I mean, you know, he
Yes,
made
exactly.
astronomy according to the field by the name of astrophysics.
Yeah.
The astronomy was looking at the stars. That's all. There's the moon, there's this and that and that. But the star ionization equation quantified the whole thing to measure the spectrum. In fact, I forgot to mention, in great poet Rabindranath Tagore, in his last book called Vishnu Parichaya, he actually figured out the 92 elements that we don't know about. That was Saha's equation discovered, in a sense, not in a sense, in every sense. So that's it. That is his contribution. But one must be careful. But then he stopped, As I mentioned, when he come back to India, he just got diffused. That's the problem with many people in our country. They do very well outside and then come here and somehow they diffuse. And I don't think they're just blaming India is good. It's something more than that. They just get somehow flagged up. But I can't hear it.
Yeah. In a way, the presentation of Professor Saha by you was for a general audience. I understand. So I think the message was conveyed from your presentation. And if there are a few more questions, our breakthrough volunteer can pick up and read it out here, apart from the chat in Zoom.
Yes, Dr. Venkateshan, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. So there is one question coming from YouTube. It says that the person who asked the question is Dr. Safiqul Alam. So his question is, in his later years, Amen Saha increasingly turned his attention to the social relation of science and founded the Science and Culture Journal in 1935. What are his main contributions in this sphere? So this is the question towards.
Well, he founded the book, a journal called Science and Culture, which used to be a wonderful journal, actually. Then it allowed usual things in Bengal, ran out of steam and money both. But now it's coming up again to connect the effect of the consequence or influence of science on the culture. And that discussed a lot of very important sociological questions with a scientific viewpoint. And I read it quite often. I find it quite invigorating, as a matter of fact. But it's not very well distributed. That's the problem.
Okay.
Right.
So
any more?
One more question came by Sevli Shabnam. So she says, I have heard that Dr. Saha had to fight against casteism throughout his life. How much is that true?
Dr. Saha, what?
Dr. Saha had to fight against casteism throughout his life. How much is that true? This is the question.
He's successful.
No, that he.
I don't follow you.
Yeah. That is, Dr. Saha, Meghnad Saha had to fight against casteism. Casteism, that is caste discrimination.
Oh God, yes.
Right.
He suffered a lot. I didn't want to that so well known. I didn't want to elaborate too much. He was what they call Chotujat, all these small sort of thing. And to the extent that in so-called Hindu hostel in Presidency College, he was not even allowed to come to Saraswati Puja. I didn't caste ridden, I told you caste ridden. I don't want to elaborate, it's so depressing. In fact, it's only after coming abroad he got through all that problem. It was serious prejudice against him because he was low caste. It's awful. It's absolutely awful. Why I say awful? I mean, you see what is happening to the Dalits in India now? Same problem.
Yeah.
Nothing changes in our country. The awful thing that Dalits are facing, and politics is coming out of it, and politics is growing on it, is against caste. I always ask the question, would you get your, not you, please, would you get your daughter married to a Muslim? The answer would be, out of 200, 300 times, no. Any more questions?
Any more questions, Manabendra?
Yes, so there is one last question maybe, and that is,
Yes. No, Manabendra, we are not able to listen to you.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Now, yes.
Yes. So Professor Saha had enormous contribution in the sphere of science through his Saha equation, the dynamics of stars, and etc. Why he did not get Nobel Prize? That was a question from one audience.
At that time, you see, in astrophysics, there was no Nobel Prize given. First Nobel Prize, if I remember correctly, was given to Tony Hewish and somebody, professor of Cambridge. Tony was my teacher in Cambridge for discovering a neutron star, late 50s. And of course, today, given by for astrophysics and substance of cosmology to black hole, discovery to other pendulums around us. But in those days, 1920s and 30s, according to the will of Mr. Nobel, there was no Nobel Prize given. However, Arthur Compton, the American physicist who was a Nobel Prize winner, recommended Saha's name very strongly. And in 1930, Saha's name was shortlisted for Nobel Prize. But who got it? C.V. Raman. Fair enough. It's a game, Nobel Prize is a roulette, that's a roulette. Okay?
Yeah. Manabendra, any more last question?
Not at this moment.
Okay. Then we are coming to the end of our program.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Bikas Sinha. It's a very, very, the moment you have taken up the task of delivering talk on the Meghnad Saha, I have not seen him directly, but the same passion, the involvement, and as if a very close colleague of him is addressing to us, and certain messages apart from science, like the people can do wonderful science right in Calcutta those days, where people are now migrating to West. This is something that is mainly because of the patriotic feeling of Meghnad Saha. Though today the environment and the ambience, which even during his own time he could not get continuously, as you pointed out, is also missing now. That is one of the reasons people have to search a place where they can do work. Well, the life is a very inspiration to us, and with the same emotion, that inspiration has been communicated to the young generation, and we owe you so much, and we are very much thankful to you.
Thank you.
And we would be very happy to listen to you in future similar talks and the scientific contributions of Saha.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Professor. And I thank all the participants who spared their time to join us in this program to celebrate this 137th birthday of the great scientist Meghnad Saha, as well as this book release function. And this book, The Brief History of Science, which is available in Amazon from today onwards. Audience can buy. They can visit breakthroughindia.org. They can put their comments and all their whatever they would like to comment on these and raise questions and in our website. And I thank all the participants once again for joining in this session. Thank you. Thank you all. And Vanavendra, the organizers can close the program.